Hello everyone, good day to you all. I wanted to talk today about slings, specifically talking about the types of slings that I've used and what I like and what kind of features I look for and why, as well as how I like to set them up on a rifle, where I put the attachment points, and also the reasoning behind that. I'm going to go ahead and get started with the slings that I have used, starting with this one right here that I have on this SLR 104. This is a Wartech TS110 sling. This is actually a single or double convertible sling. So personally, I always run double point or 2-point slings. I don't really like using single point slings. They don't allow for as much control of the gun. The way that this does work is usually you would have a HK style steel swivel up here for the sling. You could unhook this from the forward attachment point and then hook it to this D-ring right here, and that would convert it to a single point, which is just attached here in the rear. Now, of course, there is benefits to single point. Another type of sling is the 3-point sling, which just there's a lot going on with those, so I've never really been a fan of those either. I do like these types, 2-point slings that do have an adjustment tab right here. Now, this TS110 is a bit of an older style of adjustment. It's been around for a while now, very similar to the Vickers style slings, Blue Force gear. The way this works is you have a tab here that you can see. It just dangles out. This one's in gray, and then the rest of the sling's in black, so it's pretty easy to see the contrast. And you can just pull this, which tightens up the sling on your body. Actually see it's in action here. Now on this TS110, it's Velcroed on, so it doesn't dangle as much, but one issue with all of these types of slings, even when it is captured by Velcro, is that when you tighten this up a lot, there's still a lot of just excess fabric here. So even when I Velcro it here, I still got this whole loop. This is a very, very big snag point, and I have gotten this snagged on a lot of my own gear and just when I'm walking around with it tightened. So I usually leave this somewhat loose, just right about to here, and it works well enough. In the case of this sling, you do see I have this little pull cord right here. That's how you release it and loosen it back up. In the case of the Vickers, and with most of these types of slings that have an adjustment tab, you'll just pull it the opposite direction and it'll go either way, tightening it or loosening it. Now on both of these slings, one thing I do like, which is minor ultimately, but it is nice to have, is how smooth is the adjustment tab. I do like smooth adjustment tabs. Obviously they need to stay where you want them, and then if you want to actually adjust them, it is nice that they don't fight you. This Blue Force gear one is decent. It does have a fair bit of, just a little bit of friction you can kind of feel on it. But my absolute favorite so far of a sling is the Slingster, which I have right here. I actually have a lot of these ever since I tried out one on my AR. I've picked up a ton ever since, and on all my new rifles I've been putting these on. This TS110 is good enough to where I'm not going to bother replacing it, but on everything else I've been taking off the slings and putting on a Slingster. These are really good. So the Slingster is pretty much my go-to sling. I don't really even look at anything else anymore. So I want to start with the good points of the Slingster. And again, this is just a regular 2-point sling. You cannot convert this one to a single point sling or anything like that. But you do have an adjustment tab here, and you have a polymer lever on this. However, the actual tab itself is metal, which is nice for durability. But one thing I've noticed is that on specific rifles, this does wear the finish. And usually it just kind of looks ugly. In the case of this one, it just doesn't look good, but depending on your gun, it could cause issues with corrosion. So do keep that in mind. But you can see right here, and by the way, the way that this is happening, so you'll see that there's some wear right there. Just those scratched marks right there. The reason that's happening is because when I store this gun and when I'm carrying it, transporting it, the sling is tightened up all the way, and of course it just hits right there. Now, I don't actually get this though on all of my guns. This is the only gun that I have this happen with, and it's only on the handguard here. It doesn't happen with the anodization on the lower or upper receiver at all. I've tried this on several different guns. As I said, I have several Slingsters. For example, on my AR here, which I recently got Cerakoted, as well as on my Wasser, which I also have Cerakoted, there's no wear whatsoever from this. So I think it's a good point to keep in mind that this adjustment tab could potentially cause some issues with wear, generally pretty superficial wear, but still wear nonetheless on the finish of your firearm. But other than that, the adjustment tab itself is silky smooth, and you have a lot of room with it. Another thing I do really like about these slingsters, that I really just like in general with slings, is I do like padding. This isn't very much padding, this is a very thin layer of padding. Usually this is totally fine. The only time that I would want more padding is on an exceptionally heavy rifle, but usually I don't own any that are extremely heavy to where I'd actually want heavier padding. Just this small amount of padding is good. I like it even on really light rifles, and then it just makes it more comfortable. It's not totally necessary, I would say. If you're looking at other slings, as far as padding goes, just keep in mind, try to find something that is fixed in place. In the case of this slingster, it's retained right here in the front. And similarly, it has another of those in the back here. So you can adjust where this pad sits, so it's just right on your shoulder, but the pad isn't going to move on its own when you're just walking around with it. That is an issue I found a while ago. I picked up this really cheap trash Amazon sling, and it just had a Velcroed on pad that would just go up and down everywhere. And I know that there's actually quite a few padded slings that have the pad attached like that. They're usually a bit thicker of a pad as well, so it's more that can just get caught in general. And I would say to avoid those, find a fixed pad if you can. In the case of the TS110 that I was mentioning from earlier, this one is just sewn in place, so it doesn't have an issue where it can move on its own, but it also, you can't move it to where you would want it either. It's just totally fixed. So moving now to sling setup and where to attach it to the rifle, I really like taking the front attachment and putting it all the way as far forward as possible. The reason for that, there's actually two big reasons. The first is that having it this far forward, it gives you more control of the gun when it's slung, so it's not dangling around everywhere and hitting you. Second is you can shoot a bit more precise by using a hasty sling technique. And what that is, so I'm out here with my hand, just normal, usually behind it, behind where the sling attaches. And to do a hasty sling, I'm going to loosen this a bit, you'll take the sling and wrap it around your hand, and then you can pull back, and it'll really torque the gun as a whole into your shoulder, and it's extremely sturdy. And you're just from standing, and it helps a lot with that. And you can't do that if you have the sling mounted behind your hand, unless you go really, really far back and you're doing a magwell grip, but it's not ideal. So I greatly prefer this for the front attachment. Now as for the rear attachment, I actually do prefer taking this one a bit further forward and mounting it on the end plate right here. And this is direct threaded on as well, which I prefer just because it's quieter. But the reason I prefer having it on the end plate as opposed to all the way back on the stock is that when it's on the stock, it does seem to get in the way a lot more often. So the first area where that does kind of get in the way, if it is mounted on the stock, is when you actually shoulder the gun. Maybe not what you would expect since it is forward of my cheek and all that, but I am able to get a much better weld here as opposed to here. And it depends on the stock as well, but I have found a few stocks where that is an issue, where it just gets in the way quite a bit here. The other area that it becomes an issue though is when you're at high compress or high ready, you can't pull the stock of the rifle as far back towards your hip as you could when you have it mounted on the end plate. And then one other thing I do like on when I'm setting up a sling, I don't do this on every rifle. It kind of depends on how I have it set up and what kind of stock I have on it, but I do like to put a Ranger band back here. And what I can use that for is I can take the sling when I'm not wearing it and just retain the whole thing back there. I've seen other people do this. You can definitely do it up here as well. I've seen some people put a Ranger band around their handguard and then just pull the sling forward and put it right here. But when I have it back here, I can just take the sling, fold it. Usually I fold the pad itself in half, just like so, and then pull it back down, and then it just goes right back there. And then when you do want to use the rifle, you can just undo that Ranger band really quick, pull the sling forward, and just sling the gun, and you're good to go. So the biggest, most important points I would say for a sling is to just have some sort of adjustment tab. I believe I actually glossed over this point earlier, but the reason I do like this Slingster adjustment so much is because it does capture the extra fabric right here. So you don't have a whole bunch dangling out. Instead you have this loop, which is pretty low profile and is much less of a snag point than the more traditional types. And having a pad, if you decide to go with a pad, do make sure that it's either fixed or is really snug to the sling itself, as is the case with the Slingster here. They do make a, I believe it's called a naked Slingster, which just doesn't come with the pad, and you can remove the pad even if you get the padded version as well. So that is an option if you don't like the padded versions. But I do find that they make it more comfortable, generally speaking. And I haven't really had an issue with the Slingster ever getting caught on gear or anything with this pad. With some of the cheaper pads I have, just get something that's nice and low profile, doesn't stick out too much. You don't really need that much padding unless it's an exceptionally heavy rifle. And aside from that, you're good to go. I do prefer mounting to the end plate and as far forward as possible, but that is going to be a bit more personal preference. Let me know if you have any other questions on this, or if you have any other recommendations that you use for your own sling setup or for slings that you prefer. Would love to hear it. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.